Welcome back to Shelf Talks, the podcast where we dive deep into the journeys of female founders bringing their product-based businesses to retail shelves. Today, I'm sitting down with Jing Gao, the visionary founder and CEO of Fly By Jing, the brand that has redefined how we experience Chinese flavors in modern kitchens. Jing didn't just build a food company. She really built a cultural movement that continues to be at the forefront of the company. One that challenges outdated perceptions of Chinese cuisine, educates consumers, and proves that authenticity and scalability can coexist, which I love, not changing the core of who you are, right, as you build. I can't wait to unpack her journey that started well before even a product. So welcome, Jing.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah, thank you for coming on. So let's kind of dive in. What experiences prior to starting Fly By Jing really had you kind of think about a path to build this brand?
Well, before Fly By Jing, I actually had a restaurant in Shanghai, and I started to really dive deep into Sichuan cuisine. I was born in Sichuan, but I grew up in the West, and um, living in China in my 20s really allowed me to kind of reconnect with my heritage and through food. And I really loved Sichuan food, my whole life. That's just been my number one. And so I went to Chengdu and studied with an incredible chef there who I learned so much from about the ingredients from the region and the craft of the cuisine. And so I actually started out just cooking and kind of finding some kind of self-expression through these flavors. And that took the form of a supper club that I ran in Shanghai and started to take on the road and did pop-ups in cities all over the world. And it was really through that experience that I saw just how universal these flavors were, but also how inaccessible these flavors were, and the lack of access to these ingredients that were integral to these flavors. And also just like the lack of understanding of what Chinese food can be, for many reasons. I think in the US in particular, Chinese food has really evolved into its own thing, and it's very different from what Chinese food in China was. And so it was really through that experience and that journey that I saw an opportunity to bring these flavors to a wider audience, and that's how the brand was born.
So in that as part, I know I've read something in regards to when you were doing those supper clubs, you were actually transporting these ingredients around the world. Is
Mhm.
that where you're leaning into the fact that, like, just from a availability standpoint, as you were going to other countries or cities, you just couldn't find it?
Yeah, exactly. I mean, I knew, I think just even working in China, as a chef, just how rare some of these ingredients were and how integral they were to the flavors. And the stuff that you find on grocery store shelves is not the best of the best, right? And
Mm.
so the impact that really truly special ingredients have on flavor, like, cannot be understated. Even in China, it's rare. So of course you're not going to find it in the West, in a place where for so long, everyone's been told that Chinese food is low quality and cheap and not worth paying for. And so, of course, nothing of quality would ever have been exported. So that is really the insight that I had, was just like, the complete lack of accessibility, but also just how much people loved what they were tasting.
Yeah. So what were first steps once you identified, this opportunity to bring these products to the States and in front of people that hadn't experienced it really from the real cultural experience that you wanted to bring to the market?
Well, I was carrying the ingredients with me all over the place. And then I was also like batch making some of the base sauces and seasonings and the, flavors that were going into a lot of my dishes. And, eventually that took the form of these sauces that I would pre-make and, bring the sauces with me instead of like all 18 ingredients that go into a sauce, right?
Mm.
So that was kind of like the first step. And those sauces I realized were shelf stable, and I started to jar it, and my customers were all demanding the sauces themselves, so I started selling it locally in Shanghai. And but I was still making it in my kitchen, right? And just it's a very small batch and selling it locally. And then uh in 2018, I went to Expo West for the first time, and I saw this complete lack of diversity in the food space, which in 2018 was really shocking to me. And I thought, hey, maybe these sauces could have a place in the US. So I started to look into how do I scale up that production and, looking into manufacturing um, and then, thinking through, how do I bring this business to the States?
What made you attend Expo West?
Well, I was always interested in food and wanted to see what was out there in the US. I was actually with a friend who also is in the food business, and she had like a smoothie business in Shanghai. And so she wanted to go, so I just kind of went with her and walked the halls. And the first time at Expo West is always very overwhelming and
Overwhelming, yeah.
exciting for people who love food. And so I remember being very excited walking down the halls and exploring everything, tasting everything, grabbing samples of everything. But at the end of the week, I remember having this craving for Asian food. And I was like, why do I crave Asian food right now? And I realized I didn't taste anything that was Asian the entire
Mm.
week. And I was like, that's interesting. So, yeah, so that was really kind of the aha moment of like, I really think that there's something, an opportunity here or like some kind of gap in the market.
Yeah. So going from selling locally and kind of still making it at home to then thinking about bringing it in a broader scale, how were you able to find a manufacturer that was going to be able to support you in that way?
That was a whole journey. I didn't know where to start, but for me, I think what I've always done is, when something seems really daunting, I tend to try to like break it down into smaller pieces and what is like the first smallest action that I can take, right?
Yeah.
And, for me, it's like, all right, well, go to the grocery store and see what's on shelf. And so in China, you have to print the name of your factory on the label of every food. And so I just started there and just
Mm,
called all of the factories of products that were already on shelf. And, one by one, just calling them and seeing if they would be open to a conversation. And most of them were not. They're just like, who are you? Like, why would I talk to you? So just kind of like, yeah, just experimenting, trying different routes. When someone says no, you move on to the next one until you get a yes.
yeah. How did you convince that manufacturer that said yes?
Honestly, it took a lot of work. They really didn't want to do it. Nobody wanted to do it because, my process and like just everything was very different from what they were used to. And I think with that one in particular, it was just like one person at the company decided to take a chance and, decided to, kind of be like take me under kind of their wings, or I guess, and try to push the project through internally. So yeah, I mean, along the way, it's always been, kindness of people who also, maybe didn't necessarily see the vision, but wanted to support a young entrepreneur who had a dream.
Yeah, yeah, and an idea. So
Yeah.
with that, how long did it take for them to kind of nail your recipe? Did it take a long time in iterations or did they get it pretty quickly?
Yeah, it took a lot of iterating. I think there's always a lot of translation that has to happen between making something at home and scaling it up to like a much larger scale. The same ingredients cannot be sourced the same way. The temperatures can't be the same. The timing is not going to be the same. So it's a lot of like trial and error. But I think for us, it took probably like maybe like 5 months, I would say, from beginning to end.
Yeah. And then so as you are kind of working to get your finalized product, from a mindset perspective, what were you thinking in regards to how you were going to sell this? Was this going to be D2C first? Had you even had thoughts about retail? I know you visited retail stores, but was that kind of your path of growth and opportunity?
Yeah, I mean, I remember walking through the halls of Expo West and thinking not only is there lack of diversity in the brands that are represented, there's also just lack of diversity in the people that are
Mhm.
walking the halls. And it was very clear to me that like this was kind of the retail game is gonna be difficult. There's a lot of, barriers to entry, and, I had heard that there was gonna be high costs involved in getting into retail, and, it's based on who you know, and I just knew that, I didn't have those connections. But at that time, 2018, Shopify had already become, pretty well known, and, so I knew that that was a possible route. And initially, at that time also Kickstarter was pretty popular as a way to get projects off the ground. And I had a couple friends that had run successful Kickstarter campaigns to get their products launched. And so I explored that as a way to get some kind of proof of concept and, to prove out that there was demand for something like this. Because I think Kickstarter is just like a really great testing ground, right? You've got a pretty much a landing page that you're building, and you've got a minute to capture someone's attention with a
Yeah.
video and tell them why you're doing this and why it's unique and deserves to be out there and why you as an entrepreneur. So people who typically go on Kickstarter and support these are typically the early adopters, the people that, are really into supporting entrepreneurship and are also a lot more forgiving and understanding when there's delays that there inevitably is every time someone's doing something for the first time. Yeah, so that was kind of the first avenue. It was like, okay, can I do pre-sales on Kickstarter and will people buy this? And when that did prove itself out, had more confidence to be like, okay, I think, I could launch a website. And so I think it was like 8 months after the Kickstarter that I launched the actual D2C website.
Got it. So with that Kickstarter, what was initial feedback from consumers after they got the product? What were they saying about it?
Yeah. So from the Kickstarter, which was in July of 2018, to when the product shipped, which was when I finally, finished the production and moved to LA from Shanghai and received the products, it was about December. So it was like, 5 months, I guess, 5 or 6 months. So people had waited for a long time and they were really anticipating it. And the feedback was pretty immediate and pretty overwhelmingly positive. I think people had never tasted a lot of these flavors before. At that time, Asian flavors were not mainstream. They were not found in mainstream grocery stores. You had to go into Chinatown or go into, Asian stores. And there's been an explosion of growth in that category in the last 5 years, but it really wasn't the case back then. And people really responded to these flavors. I think, it was so different. The flavors were so deep and like the umami and the, ingredients were so complex that I think people really were pretty much like, in love with the flavors right away. And I think we also really positioned it as something not intimidating, and that was the other key, is that, I think because it was so Asian cuisine, like real Asian cuisine was so
Yeah.
gate kept for so long that you had to really know your way around a Chinese grocery store in order to know what is what. Like, but we removed the barriers because we made it more approachable and accessible. We presented it as a hot sauce that you can put on anything, even your breakfast, even your pizza,
Mm.
or even ice cream. And when people saw that, I think they were surprised, like that Chinese food is not this serious thing that you have to study in order to like eat and enjoy. You can make it your own. And that level of like personalization and like customization and, that it just kind of made it less intimidating for people. And that I think is what made it grow the way that it did.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that that's interesting too, just in regards to like something that's still new to people that they want to experience and pairing it with something that they already, eat and enjoy and are pretty much already have in their regimen. Like I see even on your social, like putting it on pizza and things that can just be easily integrated into your routine. It makes it
Yeah,
a lot more
exactly.
approachable. So you launched then from a D2C perspective. What was early performance after that Kickstarter and you really getting down to selling on your own website? How did that go?
So the great thing about Kickstarter is that you have this built-in audience, right? So we had between Kickstarter and BackerKit, this other website, we had like 2,500 initial backers. I was called Indiegogo, the other website, but 2,500 backers. And when I built the website, which was, built by myself in my Airbnb in LA, like a Shopify site using some kind of theme that I found.
What are the templates?
Yeah, one of the templates, I paid someone like a few $100s for a little photo shoot, and that's that was the first website. And it was, it was great because I could tap into those 2,500 people, just they were on my email list, right? So, and by that point, it was like February of 2019. People had been going through their jars already and ready for replenishment. So it was great. It was kind of like very quickly word of mouth was spreading, and people were posting about it on Twitter and Reddit, and all these press started to come in and want to talk about this product. And it was pretty kind of like grassroots sort of word of mouth growth.
How did you get press? Was that something that they saw you from a Kickstarter perspective, or were you doing reach outs to get that?
So with the Kickstarter, part of the reason why it did so well was because I reached out to a couple of writers, and they were just people that I had seen write about Asian food in the past. And so there were two writers in particular that I reached out to. And I pitched them the story. I said, this is what I'm doing, and I think you might be interested in it. And both of them wrote about us. And so one was in Saveur magazine, which was a very big food magazine at the time, and New York magazine. And so on the day that the Kickstarter went out, they both wrote about it, and like the kind of snowballed from there. So those were the two first pieces of press about us in the US. And then once the website came out, once people were really talking about it on Twitter, on Instagram, like it kind of picked up, and we got a lot more press from that point on.
That's great. Were there any changes post that you had to make from a product standpoint or packaging, or did everything kind of come to the standards and what you believed it was going to be?
I mean, there were a lot of changes that happened over time, in terms of the labels, the packaging. Yeah, I think it was a constant iterative process. But yeah, I mean, I would say that we've probably done 3 brand refreshes since the early days. And in the very beginning, I was really designing a label that was just to be eye-catching, right? Just to kind of make you do a double take. So it's very bold, very, very unlike food. I was actually inspired by like beauty products because I wanted to really show like this is different because of the quality of the ingredients in this is like just the cost of it alone is way more than, retail price of other products that had been on the market, right? And so I didn't want it to look like other products on the market. But then eventually, like after we've been in the market for a while, you know, I wanted to tell a more deeper story of like what is actually behind this product, like what makes it up and what are we all about? And so we ended up with a brand evolution that really told that story. And then over some more time, as we started to show up on retail shelves versus D2C, you had to think about packaging in a different way
Yeah.
of like, how do you now express what you want to express to somebody within 3 seconds on shelf? Whereas before, when we were D2C, we could tell a much richer brand story online. So at every point of like the business's evolution, we've had to reassess kind of how we show up.
Yeah, which is great that you weren't married to kind of that initial look, but really iterating based on the needs and what you saw your consumers and how they were going to be showcased it. So you're selling in D2C, and then what was the kind of aha moment in regards to you wanting to be on retail shelves?
Well, I just didn't think we would have any resources to go onto retail shelves because, I mean, the first couple of years, it was really just me running this business, and D2C was the only thing I could handle. And, we didn't have institutional funding or anything in the beginnings. There was no money to even pay myself, let alone, hire a team or like go into retail.
Yeah.
So I just focused on that. And it wasn't until, well, actually, in those early days, we did get some outreach from retailers, but that we just couldn't do it because we could barely keep up with supply for just D2C, let alone, I mean, I didn't know much about retail, but I knew that it was getting onto retail shelves was one thing, but staying on was another thing, and you had to
Right.
have your ducks in order. And so Whole Foods had reached out to us pretty early, and that buyer actually was a Kickstarter backer.
Oh,
So,
wow.
yeah, so he wanted us to be on shelves, but he kind of said no for 2 years. We couldn't do it. So yeah, it wasn't until 2020 after COVID, and we had a lot of like difficulty in COVID during the supply chain disruptions. We had a lot of difficulty having enough product and trying to even figure out, do we even still have a business because everything was crazy. But in that time, of uncertainty was when we actually experienced our most rapid period of growth. We ended up like 10xing the business that year.
How did that happen?
Well, I think people being at home, they were cooking more and they were looking for products like this that were D2C. So we were well positioned for that kind of moment in time. And in addition to that, we had an article written about us in the New York Times during the height of COVID and kind of highlighting the challenges of a small business that is based upon China-US trade
Hmm.
and, a food business that's made in China and kind of the interesting moment that we were experiencing culturally with like xenophobia, anti-Asian sentiment, but yet people love these flavors.
Yeah.
And so this article was written about us in the Sunday Times and it just like blew up. We ended up selling out of many months of inventory overnight.
Oh my gosh. Wow.
We turned on pre-orders and I started to get to work to figure out how do we get more products. Like, luckily at the time, this was in April of 2020, China had already been opening back up, like, because they had been shut down for like 2 or 3 months, but they were now kind of had gotten things under control. So they were opening back up. And so, worked really hard for the next few months to try to get the supply chain working again. And a lot of these folks that, found the brand were waiting for several months to get their products. And they were very, very supportive. And I think it was a time when a lot of, people wanted to support small
Yeah.
businesses. Everyone knew that it's very difficult to be an
Yes.
entrepreneur at those times. So I think those early supporters really like carried the business and allowed us to grow. And, I was able to hire my first full-time employee after that period. And that growth also attracted a lot of attention from retailers. And we got inbound requests from Target and, Costco and other stores. And so eventually we sort of grew into retail after that.
What made you feel ready at that point to go into retail?
Well, we had to really figure out the supply chain, right? There was a lot of disruption. The early days, it was just like lack of like clear planning and understanding of like demand and supply. But after COVID, it was like very apparent that we needed to strengthen the supply chain. And, we actually diversified into multiple manufacturers, not just one. Once that was all in place, that was when we were like ready to engage with retail again.
Yeah. So what was your first retailer?
So it was Whole Foods. We ended up going into that region first, which was the Mid-Atlantic region. So that buyer was based in DC and he was like, maybe we can try you first in our region and if it does well, then we'll expand you. And I think within like 2 months we got expanded to national. So that was the first one, yeah.
What were you doing that really generated the traffic in just a couple of months that said, that triggered to the buyers that you should expand?
I mean, I think like the press that we were getting, the organic social that we were getting, but also I think the Mid Atlantic region is quite a diverse area, like DC, and so I think there was already like a lot of interest in Asian food, and I think it was just kind of like part of this wave of interest that was growing in
Yeah.
ethnic food. Yeah.
Were you doing any marketing or sampling to help with that from that initial phase?
In the early days, I don't think so. We just didn't have the budget for it, but it was mainly like organic kind of content that we were putting out on socials.
Yeah. Was there anything that you didn't even know and understand until your product was actually on retail shelves?
I mean, I think that like, I was reading a lot of books and listening to a lot of podcasts, like similar to this one where, founders were sharing their stories. And I was trying to like learn as much as I could from other people's journeys, wins, and mistakes. And part of that was what told me to kind of grow thoughtfully and not
Mm,
try to go too wide too quickly, kind of start with like, the natural channels and the, specialty channels first before you grow into like more mass. So I was lucky to learn from a lot of people who had like, come before me and yeah, and hopefully avoid some of the pitfalls. Yeah. But I think it was eventually 2 or 3 years later after that that we got into many more kind of more mainstream mass stores that we realized we needed to change the packaging, to tell a better story on shelf.
And how did you learn that? Was that something from customer feedback, sales? What really prompted that?
Well, it was just observation and also competitive pressure as well. I think our success in the early days definitely attracted a lot of, newer brands into the space. And once a space gets a lot more saturated, then you do have to think about, okay, so how do you, stand out and how
Yeah.
do you communicate your differences? So, and then also like, how do you compare price wise
Mhm.
across your competitors? So you have to think about it more holistically.
Yeah. Speaking of that, you said, definitely premium pricing, launching in Whole Foods, definitely, that consumer connects. Were there any challenges from a price point perspective as you were going into more mass retailers?
Well, our goal has always been to become accessible to everybody, right? To make these flavors accessible. And part of that equation is the price point. Now, we are a premium product based on the quality of the ingredients that go into it and the smaller batch nature of the product than the mass produced stuff that was out there. Thing is that there's two pieces. One is just simple economies of scale, right? Like billion-dollar conglomerates are able to charge low prices because of scale and also because, whenever you get something for very cheap, someone along the line has paid the difference, right? Someone was either taken advantage of or, you know, the difference was paid. So that's something that, I think as consumers we need to remember. So I think oftentimes we like to say we like to support small, shop independent, but at the end of the day, where we spend our dollars, it's actually at
Mhm.
the Walmarts, right? And so it is something that is important to note. Now, so aside from simple economies of scale and the difference of like a tiny startup and being able to operate versus a giant billion-dollar conglomerate, we still want to make our stuff, more and more accessible. So when we first launched, we were $15 for a jar. And now you can find us in many stores across the country under $10 at like $9.98 full price. So we were able to actually implement a market-wide decrease of like almost 30%,
Oh, wow. Yeah.
or more than 30% over the years. And that was due to just our, continuous effort in looking for cost savings in, things like packaging, logistics, and, not sacrificing anything on the quality side. The ingredients we use have not changed since day one, but it's more just like where else can we find, savings?
Yeah. No,
Yeah.
that's great. Like still holding the quality of the product, but balancing from other aspects to be more accessible.
Hmm.
Yeah. So with that change, with you rolling out into more retailers, like Target, Whole Foods, of course you were already in, and Walmart, what did marketing look like? How did that change from what you were doing from a D2T perspective to them being available across the country?
Yeah. So I think in the early days, again, it was like purely organic social and, through some events that we would do IRL sort of pop-ups, that was how we got the word out. And then as we kind of grew, identified a lot of like specialty stores to go into, these mom and pop sort of cool shoppy shop bodega type, stores all across the country that curated really like fine goods. And I think being on shelf at those places is marketing in itself, right? Because that's where a lot of discovery happens
Yeah.
and where even grocery store buyers go to discover new products.
Hmm.
So we would just identify what those cool stores are and DM them on Instagram and try to get in. And then when we started to get a bit more scale and just had a little bit more resources, we started, doing some ads on Facebook and Instagram. This was back in 2020 or 2021. And that allowed us to, grow faster, but that comes at a cost, right? Because like doing ads and stuff is quite expensive. So
Right.
we definitely didn't have as much as some other brands, but I think in those early days when it was a bit cheaper on Meta to reach customers, we were able to get the word out there. Yeah.
Yeah.
And then press, I would say press, since the beginning have always gotten a ton of like earned media, just, press talking about new products we were launching or, gifting opportunities during the holidays. So that was a big driver as well.
What's been, do you think, the best or the most impactful mode of marketing that has helped from a retail perspective?
I would say it's probably either like press or social. Yeah, organic social. Seeding people and then people posting about the flavors that, if they love it. I think it's probably two of those. And they're both like kind of social proof, right? So just seeing other people talk about something and like, oh, you got to try it, someone that you trust. And a lot of people discover our brand through gifting as well. So because I think it's a premium product, it looks nice. It's nice to receive as a gift. It's also novel. And, during the holidays, we do a lot of gift sets and stuff. A lot of our customers say they found out about us because somebody gifted it to them for their birthday or Christmas. Yeah.
I saw that nice like gift box that you had for holiday, which just looks beautiful. So I could
Yeah.
see why somebody would want
Yeah.
to gift that. So
hmm
where in this journey did you think about funding and what really sparked that idea in order to continue your growth?
So we started getting approached by some funds in 2021. And I think, you know, that was probably when I started to think about it because, we were growing pretty quickly and there was a lot of needs from an inventory standpoint and from a, ad standpoint and the team standpoints. I think it was around then that we started to think about that.
Yeah. And did you know anything about that? And if not, how were you able to educate yourself on it?
So I like talked to a lot of people. I've read a lot of books. I was in a tech incubator called Techstars and learned about the whole venture side of things like through that experience. And ultimately, I talked to some VCs, I talked to some private equity. Ultimately, I decided to partner with our current investors who are a growth equity fund because I liked that they were more conservative with how they approached their investments. Like there were some VCs that would just invest in
Anything?
anything. And if they invest in like, dozens and dozens, if not hundreds of businesses, they're counting on only one or two to like really win big. And meanwhile, all the other investments kind of get neglected. So I wanted to make sure that whoever we partnered with would be able to provide real value. And, with private equity and with this growth equity fund in particular, like they only invest in like maybe two companies a year and every company needs to be a success. So they're going to put
Mm,
outsized time and effort into helping. So that was kind of how I made the decision. And also, the partners at my investors are both women. And that was also rare to see. And I think I really appreciated that. Yeah.
yeah. As you were pitching to find investors, did you find that challenging just based on this being kind of different in regards to the product on shelf?
Oh, yeah, it was very challenging. We had probably hundreds of rejections from investors who could not see the vision, who thought that Asian food would be too small and too niche, that it couldn't be big enough. So that was like the biggest pushback that we got.
Yeah. How about from a retail standpoint, as you're going and pitching to retail buyers, how do you articulate Asian food being true impact when it comes to sales and positioning to get people that maybe aren't, used to it or understanding it to really get over the hump and say yes?
Yeah, I mean, when we first started, there was very little excitement in the ethnic aisle. And typically, the ethnic aisle would be like a very small space that lumps in every country, right? And so, meanwhile, you have like, an entire aisle full of pasta
Mm,
and pasta sauces
yeah.
and hot sauce, right? But then in the ethnic aisle, it'd be like 4 feet of space for like Mexican, Indian, Chinese, and everything else. So, I think in the early days, there was just simply no space. But I think as the excitement in media and in culture kind of grew for these flavors, buyers realized that there was an opportunity here. So they started to expand their sets. And then they would come to us or, we would start to drive a lot of traffic into those aisles. And so over the years, we've definitely seen retailers, double, if not triple, their space within the ethnic or Asian set. I would definitely say that even with doubling and tripling the space, it is still so small compared to their other aisles, right? So there
Yeah.
is limited space. So, once the category became a lot more saturated, something we would hear from buyers would be like, I already have one Asian brand and I don't need another. So it's still that very limited zero sum thinking that exists in the industry. But the good news is that it's changing.
Yeah.
It's just taking some time.
Yeah. Is that what keeps you going? Just knowing that, it may not be a yes today, but as it changes, as people are more informed, as people start to integrate, different types of cultures into their regimen, into their diet, that will come and that space will become available.
Yeah, for
Yeah.
sure, for sure. Yeah, I think we see that culture evolving every day, and so we're part of that change, and it's gonna keep changing.
Yeah. So how do you kind of balance expanding into this mass play where, sometimes buyers, I'm sure, come and ask for things that maybe not be specific to your culture and vision of your brand, but also balance like, the needs of what they're looking for in connection or combination.
Yeah, I mean, we work pretty closely with the buyers and, hearing from them, like, kind of what they're seeing. It's always great to get that insight because they're the closest to the customer and then balance that out with our innovation pipeline and, see if there's something that we can even co-create together for a specific retailer. So, yeah, so I think we definitely partner pretty closely with our top, 3 to 4 retailers.
Have you done that where you co-created flavors specifically for them?
Yeah, I would say so. We definitely yeah, not, too frequently, but yes, I can think of 1 or 2 examples. And then, it's just kind of inspires thinking. When we do product development, we kinda look at it from many different perspectives, from a data standpoint, but sometimes, like, the data will only tell you what's already out there, and,
Yeah.
if you're ahead of the curve, then, you gotta make some choices and strategic choices that may not be provable with data at this moment.
Yeah. What does innovation look like for you? How often are you bringing in new products, new SKUs?
I would say we probably have like 3 to 5 new things every year, like whether it's like flavors or new products. And then we also do a lot of like limited edition one-offs that are just for D2C. That is to, continuously kind of like bring newness to our existing
Mm.
customers that are fans of the brand and want novelty. So we'll do that around the holidays. We'll have special limited edition products like our advent calendar and things like that. But for our core products, which right now are sauces and noodles, we typically have like maybe two new flavors of each every year.
Got it. I saw that you do a lot of collabs like with brands or even like retailers that you wouldn't even expect. Like I know you did something with Jenny's, you did a collab with Array. Is that just really about getting those cultural moments in front of consumers and kind of meeting them where they are with those experiences?
Yeah, partially. And I think the other part is just like when we work with a different brand, it's like the end result is truly a great product, and it's something that we want to see out there. For example, our Fishwife collab, that
Oh
was just
yeah.
me and Fishwife's founder Becca. We were just hanging out and having some of the sauce on her smoked salmon, and we're like, this is really good. Like, let's do something. And it started out as a D2C only exclusive, like limited edition thing, but it did so well that, and retailers wanted it. So now it's a permanent item. So that's been really cool to do. And if you go to Whole Foods, like you'll see, I think at least like 4 or 5 different co-branded collaborations in different aisles. So yeah,
That's great too because you're getting that consumer in multiple spaces in which they're shopping. Somebody that's shopping
yeah,
for Fisher Wife may not even go down the aisle that's more ethnic focused. So you get to get that consumer in a different light.
yeah, exactly.
So I know many people are gearing up to go to Expo West next week, and I know you're going to be there. Why do you attend Expo West, and what gets you excited going there?
I think it is the biggest event of the year for CPG food folks, and it is a good time mostly just to connect with peers and other brands and buyers. I think typically we go, to do that and then to also showcase any newness. So we've got a couple of new noodle flavors that we're launching next week. Yeah, I mean, it's just like the one place where everybody's going to be at, so it's a good time to just like catch up. So we typically try to meet up with some of our buyers as well and touch base. And yeah, it's a
Exactly.
really high energy week. So it's always fun. It's fun to see what's new and what's happening. Yeah.
Yeah. So what is next for Fly By Jing? What are you excited about in regards to future growth?
So we are really excited about growing into new categories. So I think, we're really a flavor brand. We're known for these deep, complex Sichuan flavors, and that can extend beyond the current line of sauces. And so when we've thought about innovation, we've thought about it through like, how can we broaden the access to even more people? And, that's how noodles came about, because noodles are an easier on-ramp for some people
Hmm.
because everybody knows what noodles are, and even if you don't know what to do with chili crisp, if you try the noodles and it has the chili crisp in it, it now opens up your eyes to what it could do. So, yeah, so I think everything we do is kind of through that lens of like, how can we make these flavors more easily accessible to more people? So, through innovation, through channel distribution, through price point, like that's how we think about it.
Yeah, that's great. I love too on your social how you have all of those recipes that makes it easy to like integrate and like try. Because sometimes
Mhm,
it is
mhm,
like a little bit intimidating, right? In regards to like, how do I make
mhm.
this? But it makes it so easy. And it seems like I saw one that I think was like a 10-minute meal today, which I'm like, oh, that's easy. I definitely can try that.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah. Where can our listeners continue to follow you, support you, and most importantly, buy Fly by Jing?
So they can follow us on Instagram and TikTok at Fly by Jing, and me personally at Jing Theory. And you can buy us on our website, flybyjing.com. That's where you're going to see like the full selection of product. Full selection is not available everywhere, but other than our website, we're also available on Amazon and in 12,000 stores across the country. So we're in Whole Foods nationwide and natural channels like Sprouts and also like Wegmans. And then in some regions of Costco, we're also in, I think, almost 4,000 Walmarts across the country. So yeah, so pretty much, most grocery stores where you shop.
Yeah, that has to be pretty amazing to say, huh?
Yeah, it's pretty great. Yeah,
Yeah,
for sure.
yeah. Well, thank you so much for coming on Shelf Talks and sharing your journey. I'm excited to meet you next week at Expo West, but also just to continue to follow the brand and see what's next.
Likewise. Thank you for having me. It was
Yeah.
great chatting.